Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. Okay, so today I have with me Dougie Blair, and he is the director at Beyond Innovation. Thank you ever so much for joining me, Dougie. It's been, honestly, everybody watching and listening, you're going to love this, because this man, I'm going to say this, you are a real innovator. You've kind of blown my mind with some of the stuff we've already talked about. And you've had such a varied career, from developing EV training courses to designing wind turbines and microgrids. Am I right?
Yeah, and lots of other things, yes.
So, can we start off by, and I will explain how we met, but I'll do that after you kind of given us a bit of your background. So, give us a little bit of an overview of how you got into this space and what drives your passion for it. And tell everybody what the space is for a start off, because there's a lot of things.
Yeah, I actually get into inventing things because I come from a family of inventors. Cool. I was brought up with a father who used to invent products for the National Coal Board. Wow. And I just thought, that's what you do when you grow up. So when I got to a certain age, around about year 2000, I got into designing and developing a whole range of different products, and over the years since I've developed over 200 products for the renewables industry, for the outdoor enthusiast who wants to climb Everest with a satellite phone and wants to power a satellite phone from solar, etc. Loads of different types of products. Products for the MOD, products for the Metropolitan Police, and a variety of renewable products like small scale wind turbines, hydro turbines, and yeah, a lot of really interesting stuff. And unwittingly, throughout that period, I was educating myself on how stuff works. So to invent things, you have to know how stuff works, so you have to do a lot of research. And as you're developing those products, you find what doesn't work, and eventually you work out what does work. And unwittingly, I was priming myself to do what I do now, which is consultation work in energy in general. And that's what I now focus on, is energy, EVs, EV charging, microgrids, and just helping businesses to understand from an energy perspective what sort of mess they're in and how to get out of that mess using the right combination of tech to do it. So that's it in a nutshell.
Fantastic. So I'm going to just explain to everybody how we got in contact. There was a chap, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been, it could have been Mark Stubbs from GridServe, but I can't quite remember if it was him. But whoever it was, put a post on LinkedIn about them charging their EV. In fact, no, I don't think it was Mark, actually, now come to think of it. About them charging their EV, and they couldn't understand why they weren't getting the speed that they thought that they should be getting, wasn't it? And I put a comment on, and then you put a comment on that blew my mind. And I jumped straight on LinkedIn messaged you, and I went, tell me more. I need to know about this thing. So you were talking about a VPAC dongle. Is it VPAC?
VPEAK.
VPEAK dongle.
Yes.
Were you that basically provides information on what your car is asking for at a charger and what the charger is able to provide you? Will you explain it? But you're going to be a lot better than me explaining this.
VPEAK dongle is basically an ODB2 interface that plugs into the ODB2 port in any electric vehicle. In fact, most modern vehicles have got one of those ports for. And it's on your it's not on your dash, is it? It's under the dash. It's usually under the steering on the driver's side or under the passenger side footwell, generally.
So if you were using telematics, that's the same kind of slot that you'd put
it's the same,
telematics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's where you put that in.
So you plug into that, and it's a Bluetooth dongle, so you plug into your car and then download the car scanner app onto your Android or iOS phone. The car scanner app is a free app, and the car scanner app then connects the dongle to your phone, and it allows the scanner app to read all the data that it likes from the vehicle, and it tells you everything. It's an absolute, it's great. It's got pages and pages and pages. If you're a tech buff, it's great. You just get completely engrossed in it.
You'll go down a rabbit hole, I bet.
Oh, it does. It'll tell you the temperature of every battery that makes up, or every module that makes up your battery in your car, etc. Plus a whole load of other things. However, on page 21 of the data, it tells you, when you plug into an electric vehicle charger, it tells you what the car is asking the charger to deliver and what the charger's offering. Now that's completely invaluable information if, like many EV drivers, you've plugged it into a charger and you've looked at your dash, or you've looked at your app and it says you're getting 40 kilowatts, and you think, hold on, my car's capable of 150 kilowatts or more. And I always pick electric vehicles which have got a very fast charging speed, very ultra rapid charging speed, so I usually pick 800 volt vehicles for that reason, because you tend to get offered far better speeds because the public charging network's geared around 800 volt cars.
Yeah.
But I was being let down, I won't tell you who by, I was being let down by a variety of different CPOs and kit. And anytime I phoned those CPOs and said, hold on a minute, my car's only pulling 50 kilowatts or whatever, I would get the usual spiel, which was, did you preheat your battery before you arrived, etc, etc. And just pointing to everything other than it's the kit, it's the charger that's causing the problem. So I thought, how do I get to the bottom of proving that it's the charger that's the problem? Because I was convinced it wasn't the car. So that's when I learned about the ODB2 dongle, the VPEAK dongle. Got one from Amazon. They're about 20 quid and they're really cheap. Plugged it in the first time I was out and about, and hey presto, it told me what the problem was, and it was the charger. So I did a screenshot, posted it on LinkedIn. Didn't go down a storm because obviously you're pointing fingers, but it actually, within the various companies that I did that with, they did get in contact with me and said, we wouldn't have known otherwise that we actually had a fundamental balancing problem with our kit unless someone like yourself had told us and gave us real data to prove what was going on. And it actually helped them to get to the bottom of some of the issues they had, which they've now resolved. I've been back at some of those sites since, and it's worked flawlessly since. So it does work. But I had a bit of a bad experience last week. Won't tell you who it was with, but a couple of different places that I went to. Plugged in my car, I had preheated the car, and I was offered 40 kilowatts on a 150. And I've got a Genesis GV60 Sport Plus, 800 volt architecture. It should take 235 kilowatts max, and it regularly does. Plugged it into an ultra rapid charger. I was the only person there, 40 kilowatts, and I thought, oh, here we go again. And that's not good. The industry has got to get away from doing that. It has to be possible to monitor what's going on in the background with chargers, to just look for odd behaviour like that. If somebody's the only person that's plugged in, there's a good chance it's not a car that can only take 41 kilowatts or 42 kilowatts, because it's hard to buy an EV today that can only take 41 kilowatts. So you'd think it would go, hold on a minute, that's a bit odd. What are they driving? Even if they had a camera at the site and they could look and see what the car is real time, if there's a wee flag comes up at their end to say, there's something odd happening at that site, let's have a look and see what's going on. Because you can't have people turning up expecting to be there and away within 10-15 minutes to get from, sort of 30 to 60%, for example, which I could have done. And then I ended up stuck because my Genesis has got a rather weird quirk. You can't stop a charging session from inside the Genesis. If you start the charging session not with the app, if you start it with a bank card, which I did, there's no button to stop the charging session.
Oh my god, okay.
And the screen on the charger wasn't visible, so there was no stop icon to press because the screen was blank, no way to disconnect. And I thought, how do you get out of this without phoning them? And then the only way around it is to go into your settings and the charger settings in the Genesis, and lower your target state of charge to 50%. It won't go less than 50, and then just hang around and wait till your car gets to 50%, at which point it says your charging session's complete, you can now disconnect, and then you can get out and unplug it, which is what I had to do. But I was doing it at 41 kilowatts, all the way from 30% to 50%, and I thought, this is not good. So yeah, we need to get away from doing that. If we're going to encourage people to switch to electric vehicles, it has to be seamless for the most part, for most people, for most sessions.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's simply not.
And if the information, so we were talking about this before we were recording, weren't we? That actually there's one charge point manufacturer that provides the information on screen about what the charger can actually potentially give you at a certain, so at certain
Correct.
levels.
If you plug in a 400 volt EV, it'll tell you what the maximum charging power is available at 400 volts. If you plug in an 800 volt EV, it'll tell you what the maximum available power, including load balancing or not, it'll tell you. And just basic information. If everyone did that, then we're going to know roughly what's going on when you plug a car in and it's not charging.
But what I'd love to know,
speed.
what I'd love to know, and I said this to you before, I'd like to see because I said to you, and people know who've been listening and watching this, that our Ioniq can only take a maximum of 44 kilowatts. So yours, I'm very jealous of yours, of course. At some point we'll get there with a higher ability. So we get 44, and a lot of the time I'm not getting that. There's one time I've actually got 46, which was amazing, with one charger. But what I'd like to see is some there's intelligence between these in these systems that they don't necessarily need to know, they don't know the car unless you've actually using the app, but something on screen that says, gives you that information that says your car is asking for that, we can only provide you with this, blah blah. It doesn't need to be in depth, it just has to be simple, because it would help people understand what that car can pull and what that charger can provide and the reasons behind it. And also that means it would surely decrease the number of support calls you'd be getting going, my EV is not pulling this and la 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 la.
Exactly.
Because not everybody is going to have that dongle, are they?
No, and even if you've got it, there's a lot of confusing information. You need to know what you're looking for in the app, and that's why I said earlier, if you go to page 21 of the data,
that'll be it.
Then it summarises what the car is asking for and what the charger's offering, and it's that information that you actually want when you're charging your car. But it's good just to do a bit of homework before you buy an electric vehicle in the first place. The problem is people tend to not do that. They don't go into one dealership and have that dealership say, ask a bunch of questions and then send you down the road to a completely different dealership from a different manufacturer, because actually they down the road would sell you a far more appropriate EV. They're not going to do that. So you need to get completely independent advice when it comes to selecting the right EV on the right architecture, 400 or 800 volts, and what is the primary use case of that car? What are you planning to do with it? Is it mostly long journeys? Is it mostly local journeys? Are you really going to need a car that can ultra rapid charge at 235 kilowatts like the Genesis, or does it not really matter?
Do you want an about town car that you don't need? You're going to have a home charger, you're going to put it on charge at home most of the time, and you're going to have the overnight tariff, the cheap overnight tariff, or are you? And I actually met an Uber driver recently at a charger, and we got talking, and he was basically saying about the prices of public charging, but also the fact that he needs to be charging some days, and this is in he was in West London, but some days he has to go up to Coventry, or he'll have to go to take somebody to East Midlands Airport or somewhere like that, and he needs to know that he's got that kind of level of reliable charging.
Exactly. So you need to understand what you're planning to use the car for. I mean, I always buy cars that have got vehicle to load capability, and we'll come on to this anyway, because vehicle to load allows me to use my car as part of my home microgrid system to run my house. So I can charge the car cheaply overnight from Octopus or Eon or something like that, and then use the car as an extension to the battery capacity that's in my static storage on my microgrid system that runs my house. And recently, that last storm just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, knocked the power out in our area for 4 days. Well, we weren't without power because we were sitting with 2 electric vehicles, a Genesis GV60 Sport Plus and an MG Cyberster, which is really quite nice.
Oh my goodness.
It is, but it's also got vehicle to load at 3.6 kilowatts. So we had the Cyberster plugged in until it got down to 50% because that's the lowest charge state it'll discharge to. Whereas the Genesis, you can program it all the way down to 20%.
Oh, can you? Wow.
Which is great. Gives you a lot of access to lots of batteries. Which, if you're like me, that's quite exciting.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's why I choose the cars I choose. It's not just because I like the look of the car and I like driving them. They have to tick a lot of boxes that most people don't consider. But when you think of that level of investment, you want the car to have more than just one use, which is driving from A to B. If it can buy cheap power overnight and run your house, and then you don't end up buying power at 26p because that's what happens to be the price cap at this point, then why not?
And you don't get that from petrol and diesel cars, do you?
No,
you can't
you
plug
don't.
them in. Do you know
Stick
what I
in a
mean?
generator, yeah. That's
But
about it.
Just before we go onto microgrids, I just want to
Yes.
step back a second, and I'd like to discuss dealerships, and I've just discussed dealerships previously with other people I've been
Right.
interviewing, because I've experienced this myself. I have my own opinions about the information that they provide to you still, or don't, at dealerships, because you're kind of, you were saying earlier, you need to get that information from the dealership, but actually even the dealerships at the moment, it feels to me, don't have that information or don't want to give you that information, because I've been to our local dealership, and you know which car I've got, so I'm not going to say who they are, but because you already know it. And I've had negativity from them about, oh well, I don't believe in electric cars and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, good God, I'm at a dealership and you're saying this stuff to me, and how are you actually selling these vehicles? And having enough information for that person to make that informed decision.
Well, my experience of dealing with dealerships has always been not good. That's the best way to describe it. But
Yeah.
I'm always unduly prepared when I go to buy something. It's an electric vehicle, for example, and I suppose it's just a sort of awkward streak in me that I'll go in there with some questions that I know they can't possibly answer. Like, I will. But even asking basics like, does it do vehicle to load?
Oh,
What's
don't.
what's the
Yeah.
capability? And they look at you as if you've got horns. And then, could you show me what does the charging curve look like? Now you can download it online, and they don't even have the gumption to have a charging curve sitting in front of you to say, right, there's what the charging curve looks like. And again, that's why I picked the Genesis GV60. All this 10 to 80% nonsense. No, it's you want to keep the charging speed as high as possible, as quick as possible, for as long as possible. And the GV60 will still be doing 80 or 90 kilowatts at 90%, and then it tails off. So 10 to 80%, it just is a legacy discussion that seems to have got into the psyche of EV drivers, that 10 to 80% is the sweet spot. Depending on what car it is. Do your homework, pick a car that's got a charging curve that actually does what you need it to do, and then that 10 to 80% piece just evaporates, and you'll do 10 to 90 or 10 to 95 or 5 to 95 or whatever it's going to be. And there are some charging curves that are completely crazy. If you look at some charging curves, they'll claim on paper, the car can take 175 kilowatts, for the first few percent, and then it nosedives. So it's not really capable of 150 kilowatts. Well, technically it is, but it's only 150 kilowatts for the sake of being able to claim it's 150 kilowatts for 5 minutes. And that really annoys me.
That's
you need a charging curve it stays as high as possible for as long as possible. And of course the BMS is there, the battery management system in the car, the BMS is there to protect the battery. And you get all sorts of people, again, and you've seen this yourself and heard this yourself on LinkedIn and social media, or don't ultra rapid charge, or don't rapid charge your car all the time, or don't use a home charger all the time. Always do a good mix because it's good for the battery. You're not going to own the car long enough for the battery to ever be a problem in modern EVs. Modern EVs have got a battery management system it's well worded. It's called a battery management system. It's there to manage the battery so that you don't screw up.
I like that. Yeah,
you can't screw up. It behaves itself. You give it some power, it'll behave itself. It'll look after itself.
Yeah.
And
it says what it does on the tin. That's the thing, isn't it?
And then companies like Volt Test are now beginning to publish some interesting information about cars. They've done a state of health at various scenarios. And recently they posted on LinkedIn, I can't remember the two vehicles, but they posted both vehicles had done about 65,000 miles and they were at 96% state of health. One car had virtually always been rapid charged and the other had virtually always not been rapid charged, and they were both at 96%. And you feel it just going, see?
Yeah.
I told you. But instead, everyone's, I'm not going to buy an electric car because what's about when it comes to changing the battery? So, what are you talking about? The car's going to fall to bits before the battery's dead.
I know, but me and you know these things. We know these things, don't we? The misinformation out there, Dougie, it's shocking.
It's actually, I think it's hilarious. I think you can deliberately start something and by the end of that day it has become a fact, despite the fact you made it up. It's just complete nonsense, half of this. Well, in fact, the majority of it's complete nonsense. But you can see why some people just treat it as a bit of a game though. They'll just make up something and before you know it has become fact when it's never been a fact in the first place.
But when we're talking about people making an informed decision, we're both getting on our orange boxes now, aren't we? But hey, when people are trying to make that informed decision, when all you're doing is trying to swim through misinformation soup, that's not easy, is it?
You would think the best place to get properly sanitised information would be dealerships.
I know, but it's
But
not.
dealerships are skewing their advice based on what they sell and the knowledge of what they sell.
Or lack
And
of.
the first question to the customers, since there's a few brands out there that do cars that sort of tick most boxes all the time, but there are plenty of brands that don't tick a lot of boxes, but they'll still sell plenty of vehicles.
Yeah.
But the people that work in there are being tasked to sell electric vehicles from that manufacturer, so they're not going to highlight all the shortcomings of what they're offering. What's really required is you need people that are completely independent, that have no axe to grind and don't work for any of these companies. I mean, this is what I do for all my clients anyway. If my clients take me on as their energy consultant, then I just give them the harsh reality, which is always brutally harsh. I don't hold back. I tell them what mess they're in and what mistakes they've made, and I'm quite brutal about it because why shouldn't I be? Because they've believed all the hype online, or one of their pals has googled something and suddenly it becomes a fact.
A real thing, yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, they've gone and switched half a dozen vehicles to fleet vehicles, and then they've realised they're going to be sitting most of their time at service stations waiting for the car to charge because they've bought 400 volt EV that can only charge at 100 kilowatts or something like that, and it's got a rubbish charge curve. And you think, how did that happen? And it's because they didn't take impartial advice from somebody that tried to understand what they're trying to achieve, what a typical use case would look like, and then make a short list of vehicles that fit that use case, and then give the pros and cons about each of those vehicles to then let them make an informed decision. That's what they should have done, but they don't.
Yeah.
So they waste the money and then they worry about getting out of the deals, and they're in a 3-year contract, and it's just rubbish.
I've said this before on the podcast though, you don't know what you don't know, and actually this is why it's good to actually to have you on here so people can hear it, and then they can find you on the, I'll put it in the show notes and make sure that they can talk to you. And I think it's great that you are actually being, really honest and forthright with them, because you don't want to be just massaging their ego and going, oh, of course you've done the right thing, do you?
Well, before I take any client on, I offer them a 1 hour Zoom call They haven't paid for my services, they haven't decided whether they want me as their energy consultant, so they've got an hour to pick my brains about anything they like. It's like a live CV. They're interrogating me for an hour to see whether I know what I'm talking about. At the end of that hour, they'll either decide to take my services on or they don't. And if they don't, it doesn't really matter. If I've told them information that's helped them, then great. If they decide they don't want to take my services on, it doesn't really matter. There are plenty of people who do want to employ my services for various reasons, and it's always because they've got themselves in a mess, usually.
Yeah.
And then they want somebody that can
realise.
get them out of a mess,
Yeah.
and then I get involved and then try and undo the mess and fix it. But
That's
I
what
love that
improvement's
because
all about, isn't it?
but it's good fun because you can see the logic that got them into the mess, and then you can point out why that was illogical for them to have done what they did to get into that mess in the first place, and then I can put a strategy together to get them out of that mess.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
good
It's
fun.
that.
I enjoy
It's
it.
that
I enjoy
holistic.
it.
It's that full. That holistic picture of what the problems are. So let's start talking about microgrids because this is a really
Yes.
important part of
It's all tied in.
what you do. All of this. So can you start off by? And I know we've mentioned microgrids, but what is a microgrid? What does it comprise of? What does it do? And how
Yeah.
are you kind of managing this?
Well, a microgrid can take many different forms, and to many different people, microgrids are a different beast, depending on what sort of background they've got. But the sort of microgrids that I'm involved in, the ones I design, are a combination of renewables, so typically solar PV, wind, hydro, etc., and battery storage. Now, as soon as you mention renewables and battery storage, you get this vision of 4 kilowatts of solar on the roof of a house and a Tesla Powerwall in the garage.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about industrial scale battery storage for businesses and industrial scale PV on the roof of industrial premises, so 100, 200, 500, 600 kilowatts peak of PV into 4, 5, 600 kilowatt hours of battery storage with inverter capabilities capable of running the entire business.
Right.
Now, typically the systems I'm designing are used on farms. Dairy farms are a classic. I had no intention of looking for dairy farm clients. I was referred to a dairy farmer about 2 years ago who came out of contract at the start of the Ukraine-Russia war when energy prices became chaotic.
Yeah.
They came out of an energy contract at 15p a kilowatt and went on to 66 pence for a 2-year deal. I get an alarming phone call to say, we've just ended up with a 66p deal, how do I get myself out of this? And I said, become self-sufficient. Become self-sufficient, and it doesn't matter whether it's 66 pence or £6.66 a kilowatt.
Yeah.
You've no intention of buying any power at that rate anyway, so it doesn't matter what tariff you're on. You just need technology that effectively removes you from the grid, but not entirely. Some people want to disconnect from the grid so that they don't have any bills. I get that. That's not an easy thing to do.
No.
And it's not easy because most businesses yet haven't transitioned to EVs in their fleets. So their energy profile today isn't the same as what it's going to be in 2, 3, 4 years' time when they switch all their vehicles to electric. So I keep telling them, look, keep the grid connection there, but minimise what you buy from the grid. And to do that, I design bespoke microgrid solutions. Now, I don't install these. I design the systems and then get people from within the industry who are microgrid experts to put the kit together and to deploy and look after that kit. I look after the data that the kit provides. But those microgrids invariably involve existing PV that the business has already put in, that they put in based on a solar installer having told them it would get them, 60% self-consumption. And self-consumption and self-sufficiency are two completely different things.
Go on. Okay.
Self-consumption is the amount of power that a real-time solar installation or wind installation will be consumed on a business. So if you fit solar panels to the roof of a dairy farm that milks cows at 4 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know it's going to do nothing to their bills because they don't milk cows at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day when solar is at its peak.
Yeah.
And yet go onto most dairy farms and they've got solar on the roof.
Right.
And you feel like taking them aside and giving them a good shake and, and say, how did you end up with solar on your roof? You're a dairy farm that milks in the morning and at night. So it's always because the solar industry is very good at selling their wares. They've got a van full of solar panels. You've got a roof, you've got a big bill, therefore you're going to get solar panels on your roof because you're going to have you're going to have a great outcome and you're going to have a huge level of self-consumption from your system, when in fact that's never the case. You rarely come across a business that's energy profile matches a solar PV production unless you're a garden centre. How odd is that? If you look at garden centre energy profiles, their energy profile goes through the roof in the middle of the day because everyone's in the cafe getting tea, buns, toasties and hot food.
Yeah.
So the kitchen's running full tilt, so the energy consumption is running full tilt, and everyone spends their afternoons in garden centres meeting their pals.
That's
So
what me and my friends
solar-
did yesterday, actually. Yeah, we
Well,
did.
So do I. I'm at that age. So
Me too.
exactly. So the garden centre and solar panels works really well. You don't really need much battery storage apart from overnight consumption from walk-in fridges and freezers that create a background energy consumption profile. But going back to how I got into this, that particular dairy farm, I solved their problem, got them to 93% self-sufficiency, not self-consumption, 93% self-sufficiency with a system that involved quite a chunk of solar, lots of battery storage, and effectively an off-grid system. So this is a system that runs the farm. It has a grid connection, but as an input only to the system.
Right.
And that's because DNOs get involved in discussions if you traditionally have a hybrid connection to the grid because you're using the grid to synchronise with the kit. The systems I design don't synchronise the grid to the kit. There's no export capability, there's no inversion on the grid, there's no inverters on the grid. So invariably, there's no DNO involvement. Right. So in the same way that you can buy a kettle out of Curry's, go home, switch it on, and you don't have to phone your DNO to ask for permission to switch a kettle on because it's an import-only device. I design microgrids that are import-only devices that are essentially off-grid microgrids.
Yeah.
So they've got a charger input. That's the best way to describe it. I won't go into too many details because it'll give the game away for people that think, that's a damn good idea for business, why don't we do that?
No, we're not doing that. Not doing that.
No, we're not doing that. So yes, the front end of these microgrids is import only. In other words, you couldn't export. It's impossible to export. The kit has no export capabilities. So the microgrid will pull power from the grid, but it will only do it based on a hierarchy of cheapness of power going into the microgrid. And what I mean by that is, if you've got solar PV on the roof, wind turbine because you invested in one under the feed-in tariff scheme years ago, you might have a diesel generator because you're a dairy farm and you really need to have one. Then there's therefore a hierarchy of cheap cost of power going into that microgrid. The cheapest being solar at roughly 4 to 4.5 pence a kilowatt levelised cost. Then potentially wind because it'll have paid for itself under the feed-in tariff already, therefore it's kind of free. Then it's diesel generator, which at 70 pence a litre for diesel, for red diesel, it's roughly 15 to 17p a kilowatt.
Okay.
Then it'll be your overnight tariff if you're in a split tariff from your energy supplier, which might be 18 to 20p. Then it'll be your daytime tariff, which could be 30p or more. So there's a hierarchy of cheap power coming into your microgrid. I then program that microgrid to always pull from cheapest first, then next cheapest, and never pull during the day, unless you've absolutely run out of options. That way, you can negotiate with your energy supplier a disproportionately high cost for daytime tariff in return for a disproportionately low nighttime tariff, with the intention of never buying any power during the day.
Wow.
So the outcome for the customer is really good because they use cheap overnight power, augmented by real-time solar or wind, etc., backed up by a diesel generator. It makes them power cut proof, so they don't end up with power cuts at all. And they've got resilience upon resilience. They've got the grid, they've got a generator and a microgrid. They've got three sources of power they can fall back on. So they're never going to be out of power. And for lots of businesses, that really matters. It transpires that if you've got a robotic dairy, having no power cuts is really good, because you don't have to reset a bunch of systems after each power cut. Even if you get a backup generator in a robotic dairy, when the generator kicks in, there's a dead spell between the grid going missing, the generator starting, the changeover switch switching over, and everything restabilising. Might take a minute, might take 2 minutes. Then everything has to be rebooted, and then you've got some computers that control this, that and the next thing. It's just rubbish. And why are we tolerating that? This is 2025. Just make it seamless. You go to your bed, you get up, you do whatever you're going to do, and don't worry about where your power's coming from. Someone else is looking after that for you to make sure you buy next to nothing from the grid. That's my job. However, things get really quite interesting, which I touched on earlier. I pick the electric vehicles I've got because I've got my own personal microgrid at home. We run our business from home, we've got a very energy efficient house, we run lots of heat pumps. It's obscene. But we bought the electric vehicles we've got because they've got vehicle to load capability. Now, before widespread vehicle to grid becomes a thing, vehicle to load is quite common nowadays, and vehicle to load is more than capable of running your house. It's just that vehicle to load can't connect to your house directly because it doesn't synchronise with the grid, etc, etc. So my own microgrid is essentially an off-grid system, which means I'm power cut proof, but it's got grid inputs from cheap sources. Octopus Energy, for example, 8.5 pence, because of where I am geographically. I don't get the cheapest of their tariffs, but it's 8.5 pence for 5 hours each night. So I can charge up the static storage in my microgrid overnight, also charge my car during the same window at 8.5p, and use the car's own battery as an extension to the microgrid during the day. So that gives me 45 kilowatts of battery storage in my home system, which is industrial battery storage. I just went overboard on it. Augmented by a further 77 kilowatts of battery within my GV60, my Genesis GV60, which I can take all the way down to 20% state of charge when I'm discharging that car. So I've got a usable 60 or so kilowatt hours of power in the Genesis that can be used to top up the system. So in the recent power outage that we had during the storm a couple of weeks ago, we had no power outage, we had no shortage of power. And if it looked like we were going to run out of power, all I have to do is just drive down to the nearest rapid charger somewhere that's still got power, charge the car back up like a jerry can with petrol, but it's electrons in my battery in my Genesis, and then drive back home, plug it in and run my house. So complete no-brainer if you want complete resilience in a home system or a business system. And when you look at businesses that go down the route of their own microgrids, they need to look at their EV fleet as part of the solution to how do you sort your energy problem overall. Having a microgrid with solar on the roof is one thing, but having a microgrid with solar on the roof and 2, 3, 4, 5 cars in a car park which have charged at domestic properties overnight on E.ON's 7p 7-hour tariff, coming back to work, having had that charging session covered by the workplace because it's considered a work vehicle, etc, etc, you've effectively moved power from a domestic property, your business. Those cars then plug into the microgrid at the business and provide power to the business, effectively at 7 pence. So again, why would you buy power at 30 pence off the grid? And then complain you've got a big bill? Do something about it. And the beauty of microgrids is this. I design microgrids which are funded through the energy savings that they provide. So if you're paying £5,000 a month in energy costs or electricity costs for a business, I advise that business to reduce the payment to their energy supplier to £1,000 a month. Pay £4,000 a month to their bank to borrow the money to get rid of £4,000 out of the bill. It doesn't cost them a penny to sort the problem, but they choose not to sort the problem and just continually spend £5,000 and burn £5,000 a month with nothing to show for it. When, for the same expenditure, they end up at 70, 80, 90% self-sufficient in their business forever. So if you've got a microgrid system that's designed to get you to, let's say, 75% self-sufficiency, and it takes 5 years to pay it off, that's 5 years of parting with the same money you would have done had we never met. But at the end of that 5 years, 75% of your bill becomes zero forever. That's not a difficult thing to sell anyone in business. And it allows them to take control over their energy costs, and together we practically set targets, or practical targets, that's what I mean, of achieving 75%, then maybe 80, 85, 90, 95% self-sufficiency in the business. Getting to 100%, very tricky, because you need very reliable backup sources, which is always a diesel generator, which never ticks a green box unless it runs on HVO. So I tend to steer people away from trying to get to 100%, but have a sensible target for a sensible spend to get a sensible outcome. But you've got to think of the EVs as part of that solution, and vehicle to load at this point is a great part of that solution because it's already there. You just need to pick the right vehicles. So in a nutshell, that's what microgrids do for businesses.
No, that's cool. And I was going to say, I'm assuming there will be other business types that have a similar maybe energy profile to the farms that you've actually been providing.
Well, yes. From the original dairy farms that I got introduced to, I was previously involved in heavy engineering companies, injection moulding companies, etc., who are always heavy consumers 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they need serious amounts of solar, serious amounts of battery storage, etc. But I got introduced to a whole bunch of wide and varied businesses, from soft fruit growers in the Leeds area to pig farmers to potato farmers that supply potatoes to people that make oven chips. I won't mention their brand, but everyone knows who they are. Yes. And I now have a whole broad range of different types of businesses. And the most interesting part of dealing with different types of businesses is once you've created an energy profile and you look at how these types of businesses consume energy, you know when you engage a new client from that type of sector, you kind of know what you're letting yourself in for, and you can very quickly let them know what they're letting themselves in for by pointing out that you're doing business with other similar types of businesses that had the same problem as them, which have since been solved, and to expect a good outcome. And they want to speak to people that they've already done this, and they want to hear what the outcome has been for them.
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't have to sell anything to these people. They sell it to themselves once they've had discussions with people that are doing it already.
Yeah.
It's sort of this all materialised out of an early microgrid system that I developed for my own property when I first built it in 2013. When I built the property, it was one of the most energy efficient properties in Scotland. I didn't know that at the time until I built it, and then I was told this is one of the most energy efficient properties in Scotland. It's got an EPC rating of 102, which is pretty unheard of. Easy to heat, but what they don't tell you about energy efficient properties are they're really hard to keep cool in the summer.
Right.
And you end up, you can't sleep at night. You need to fit aircon systems into properties that are well insulated. They don't tell you that. So we've learned the hard way. We've now got aircon, split aircon for heating and cooling, as well as underfloor heating.
Fair enough.
So we've had to use loads of split aircon to cool the place down. But anyway, and in the summer you've got copious spare power because the solar panels overproduce in the summer, so it doesn't matter that you've got split aircon cooling your living room and your bedroom down. Because you've got the power to do it. So it costs you nothing to run it.
Yeah.
So if you get things right, your energy requirements are lower, which means the scale of the microgrid required to provide the power for that consumption is much easier to solve.
No, this is brilliant. I'd like to know, because we talked before about something that I think we need to kind of highlight as well, because there's so many things that I could talk to you about, so I'll probably have to get you on again. Can we talk about net metering? Because that was something that I'd never heard of, and it works with what you're talking about with the microgrids and everything like that. But the UK as a whole doesn't provide or offer net metering, does it?
Right. There's a bit of history here. We'll go back a bit. 2006, 2008, I ran a hydro business in Scotland. I won't go into too much detail, but the hydro business in Scotland was small scale. 3.6 kilowatt hydro turbines, which doesn't sound much, but it's 3.6 kilowatts of continuous power for appropriate sites. Those appropriate sites were historically mill sites. So they had a mill race water wheel, and their energy came from a water wheel, mechanical energy. So this turbine could be installed, I designed this small scale turbine that could be installed in previous mill sites up and down the country, of which there used to be 44,000 across the whole of the UK. So the turbine was designed, we started doing installs, and at the time we were being paid double ROC's renewable obligation certificates, 9.6p a kilowatt they were worth. So it was a good investment for an investor to get behind the project, and we did, we had a private investor behind the project. Won't go into too much detail. But it was to encourage people into renewables before anyone was interested in solar or wind or anything. That hadn't happened. Feed-in tariff hadn't happened, RHI hadn't happened by that point. It was a pioneering project, launched in Scotland. It was on the news, I get interviewed at the time, and it was really going places. We had to pull the plug on it, excuse the pun, but we had to pull the plug on it for various reasons to do with the Environment Agency and stuff like that. However, during the same time, I was looking at countries across Europe that had adopted net metering. And net metering was where effectively smart meters had been installed in these countries, which would tally what power you were buying from the grid and what power you were selling to the grid. And a net metering contract or a net billing contract effectively subtracts what you've sold to the grid from what you buy from the grid, and your bill is the difference. Sounds logical to me, and I thought that would be great at encouraging the uptake of renewables, and I can see why it's been adopted in other countries. So I approached the Scottish executive at the time and said, why don't we have net metering in Scotland? And they said, we don't have the devolved powers to implement it, you'd have to go to Westminster. I got a group of people together, we went to Westminster, we lobbied for net metering at the time, and we were told it was too complicated for VAT reasons.
Right, okay.
And I thought, well, why would that be? It's 5% both ways if it's domestic, and it's 20% both ways if it's in commercial. But anyway, they were just looking for an excuse. So we eventually gave up. But if you look at countries that have adopted net metering, they've adopted it in different ways in different countries. And the way net metering works, as I've explained, is if you're a self-producer of electricity and you produce more than you need in the summer, let's say it's from solar panels on the roof of your house, you're out at your work during the day, you've got 4 kilowatts of solar on your roof, it's going to spill onto the grid. The majority of that power is going to spill onto the grid, and some of it's going to be used in your fridge, because it's the only thing in the background that's going to be running, give or take. So that grid spillage effectively gets credited to you at the same rate as you're pulling power from the grid. So if you're paying 26p a kilowatt for power coming in from the grid, you get credited 26p for what goes out, because technically what's happening to that power that goes out, it goes down your street to your neighbour, and they pay 26 pence for it.
Yeah.
So somebody's getting 26p for power that you've put into the grid for nothing, so why shouldn't it be you that gets it back? Because it's you that invested in the technology that created that free power that went onto the grid that was sold to your neighbour for 26p. So net metering makes it fair, in my opinion, and in the opinion of all the countries that have adopted it, which includes almost every country you can think of across the whole of Europe, the States, Australia, etc. They've all got net metering. We have always managed to avoid net metering in the UK for various political or other reasons. Who knows? Bottom line is, what net metering would allow, and I'm going to touch on this, I won't go into detail because I'm working on something behind the scenes which is quite interesting, but net metering would effectively allow peer-to-peer energy trading. Now, peer-to-peer energy trading sounds extremely interesting. It would allow me, as a self-producer of energy, to bank power on the grid that I can then use to charge my car halfway down the M6. Why should I not be able to use my power that I've invested in to charge my car no matter where my car is? Why does it have to be at my house, and why do I have to buy my own power back to charge my own car? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever in anyone's book. So, if you think of the implications of being able to bank power, then I should be able to sell my excess power to you. So Liz, you come home, you plug your car in, and it's not sunny where you are, like today, but it's sunny here. I've got excess power right now. I want to sell you my excess power. Today I can't. think of the implications of allowing peer-to-peer energy trading in the UK, which requires net metering to effectively unify the value of exported power and imported power, which means it doesn't matter who consumes the power that went out at 26p, it doesn't matter who consumes it, somebody has been credited for it for someone else to consume it. So net metering would allow peer-to-peer energy trading, which would completely transform the uptake of electric vehicles, in my opinion, and renewables in particular. Who wouldn't want to bank summer overproduction of solar to run a heat pump to heat their house for nothing in the winter?
Yeah,
That's what net metering does. And you don't need a truckload of batteries to do it. You're using the grid as a battery, and a lot of people say that the grid isn't a battery. Okay. When power goes onto the grid from 10,000 solar arrays from domestic properties, less power is being produced by gas real time to operate industry in the middle of that day. So you've banked future use of gas by not having burnt it because you were getting all this power from tens of thousands of producers during the day. So you're not banking it, what you're doing is requiring less fossil fuel energy to produce the grid or to hold the grid up, because a lot of that power is being spilled onto the grid during the day. And summer to winter, you bump a hell of a lot less gas in the summer months because people are not running their heat pumps in the summer, they're going to run them in the winter. So what you've saved in not burning that gas in the summer months, in simple terms, gets burnt in the winter. So you don't need a battery to do that, you're just shifting the timing of when existing fossil fuel related backup systems are operating in the summer months or in peak times during the day to then come in at times when you need the power elsewhere. The fact is, the grid is investing in pumped storage, battery storage, rotational storage and flywheels, etc., gravitational storage. It's all happening anyway, so yes, there is some form of banking of that power, but it's short-term banking. So peer-to-peer energy trading would completely transform the energy industry at no expense to the public purse. The government could introduce net metering tomorrow, pave the way for peer-to-peer energy trading, and they wouldn't have to worry about the uptake of renewables or air source heat pumps. It would be a total no-brainer to produce your own power, overproduce in the summer, buy it back in the winter when you need the heat to heat your property. And for driving electric vehicles, charge at home with your own power, and what you don't use of your own power, you use it elsewhere. So that solves the problem of being able to consume power anywhere on the grid, since we're all connected, on a platform that relies on net metering to prop up peer-to-peer trading.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to do this, then come to me. I've got a team of people that know how to do this. We just lack an open-minded investor. That's the best way to put it. That just says, yep, I'm on board, I understand it. Given that we could do this today and create a platform that allows peer-to-peer energy trading in every other country apart from the UK, we could make a fortune everywhere else, bar here. And it's here that's got the problem.
Just got a question, just
yes.
stepping back, because I want to understand something. And this is kind of before the, so this is more to talk about net metering right at the beginning. So my in-laws and my nephew have both got, so my nephew he bought a house with, and he inherited solar panels that were on the feed-in tariff.
Yep.
So both him and for my in-laws as well, they put solar panels on very early, and they benefit from the feed-in tariff. So they're getting paid for energy that they're exporting. We also, from our solar panels, we get paid, but it's not the same, it's miles off them. So for somebody who is, because they've said that their energy bills are kind of more or less zero, is there a benefit for people who are on the feed-in tariff to go to net metering as well?
Right, feed-in tariffs were set up, especially from a domestic perspective, which you've just described. They were set up in quite a unique way to save on the metering costs. When you installed, which was almost invariably 4 kilowatts of solar, because that was the peak for feed-in tariff payments. It's 4 kilowatts of solar on a 3.6 kilowatt inverter, 16 amps per phase under what was called G83 grid connection permission at the time. It simplified the process to allow the mass deployment of roof-mounted domestic solar installs.
Yeah.
But in order to not require an export meter to be installed in every one of those premises, which would have been a nightmare, you just had a total generation tariff, which was installed by the installer of the PV system. That total generation tariff gets read once a quarter by the homeowner, submitted to your energy supplier, and the energy supplier pays you feed-in tariff plus what's called a deemed export. And the deemed export was deemed as 50% of everything you produced. So if your meter that you're reading, which is the total generation meter, said that you produced 100 kilowatt hours of power in a month, it was deemed that half of that spilled onto the grid. The reality is, it could have been a lot more, and probably is a lot more, but to save having to actually get true metered figures and have the cost of extra metering and the hassle of extra metering, they made it a deemed tariff. So anyone that's in receipt of feed-in tariff today has still got a deemed export part of their total payment. They've got the feed-in tariff, which ironically has nothing to do with feeding into the grid. It was a badly worded tariff. It's not a feed-in tariff, it's a total generation tariff, but it happened to be called a feed-in tariff.
Right, get you.
And the reason it was, to prove it was badly worded, if you were off-grid and you installed solar under the feed-in tariff, you still get paid feed-in tariff. You had no grid connection. So clearly it couldn't feed into something.
Yeah.
Because I know lots of installs, in fact I did lots of installs on off-grid sites, which don't get the deemed export, because there's no export because there's no grid connection, but they still got feed-in tariff despite there not being a feed-in to the grid. It's a total generation tariff. So today, if you're in receipt of feed-in tariff, you've got a total generation, you've got a deemed export tariff included in that payment. What you can do is, you can contact your energy supplier and split out your feed-in tariff from your deemed export. Then net metering would allow that export to then credit you the full value of
Yeah,
stuff.
makes sense. Fantastic.
So there you are.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one final question. Because, like I say, there's so much more that I could ask you and could talk to you about because you've done so much. If there was one policy change that you could make today to accelerate the renewable energy adoption in the UK, what would that be?
Allow peer-to-peer energy trading in the UK that doesn't involve sleeving.
And we won't talk about sleeving yet either. I'll get you on next time, another time, and
very briefly.
Sleeving another time.
Very briefly, if I want to sell power from me to someone else, I have to rent the grid. If I have to rent the grid to get power to them, I have to use a third-party energy company as part of a three-way agreement for me to get my power to you. Peer-to-peer energy trading effectively turns electricity into what used to be called a BitTorrent. If you know anything about BitTorrents.
I've heard of BitTorrents. Yeah.
Right. Well, if you imagine energy was a BitTorrent. If you need 10 kilowatts of power today, you don't need to get 10 kilowatts from one supplier. You could have 100 domestic properties, each doing a tiny bit of power, all selling you their bit of your requirement. It becomes bit energy. Now, bit energy, peer-to-peer trading would transform this market. And all it needs is a legislation change that allows peer-to-peer energy trading without having to be behind the meter. Anybody watching this who wants to do this, then absolutely get in touch. I've been thinking about this since I first got into this industry 25 years ago. This is all I've been thinking about, is how do you fix this energy market? It's completely broken. Our energy market is completely broken. But it could be fixed with a very, very few and very subtle changes to the way that energy is allowed to be traded. It would relinquish the control of the big six, which couldn't happen soon enough in my opinion, and it would allow proper self-generators of power to properly invest in renewables, and it doesn't involve a penny of public money. And it would transform the uptake of heat pumps, transform the uptake of electric vehicles and renewables. If we've got a genuine net zero strategy, we can do it without investing a single penny of public money, just by subtly changing a couple of rules that allow either net metering or peer-to-peer energy trading. You don't need both. You can do it one or the other.
Dougie, you've been an absolute star. I'm going to say thank you. Thank you. It's
You're
been
welcome, anytime.
absolutely amazing. I'm sure everybody who's been watching and listening has really, really appreciated and what you've said. So please do get hold of Dougie if
If you want your brain fried, get in
yeah.
touch.
Well, no.
Basically.
Honestly, it's brilliant. I'm going to put all of your links and everything in the show notes, so you'll have everybody watching and listening to this will have that. I want to just say to you, and I say this every time now, please don't forget to tell people about the podcast. Like, subscribe, share it, comment on our socials, subscribe to YouTube and the like, and your favourite podcasting platform, because we need people to hear what Dougie's got to say. So on that note, Dougie, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been fantastic. And to everybody else, I'm going to say thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you later. Thank you for watching Electric Evolution. I really love bringing you these weekly conversations about sustainability, renewables, and building a cleaner future together. If you're passionate about positive change, please like, subscribe, and share with others who also care about these topics. You can also download our white paper, Plugging into the Future, at fullcircleci.co.uk and join the discussion on improving sustainable transport, or email me at liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye.